Alright, last week I talked about tanking. Now we're talking about the other side of tanking. What happens after you tank? Well, I'll tell you what happens after you tank. You rebuild. You take the players you got from tanking, the players that you took and scrapped for parts and all the picks you got, and then you try to rebuild a team that will hopefully have a long span of time where they're good. I think we know that every NBA team isn't good forever. You have ups and downs. You kind of have to have ups and downs because you have to draft new players, you have to get new rookies, and you have to get rid of your old players. Why do you have to get rid of your old players? If you have great players, why do you have to get rid of them? You do have to get rid of them because those good players are gonna want more money, and there is a salary cap. It is soft, but there is a salary cap in the NBA. So you end up having to get rid of your old players because they're gonna want too much money. It's a pretty interesting system, so you can't just keep paying your guys over and over again unless they're like, I'm gonna take a pay cut because I want to be on this team. It doesn't really happen. It's kind of a dumb thing to do. You're trying to make as much money as you can in your career. How long does it take to rebuild? Well, it could take any amount of time. It could take a couple years. It could take 5 years. It could take like 15 years. Let's take the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings have not been in the playoffs since 2006, and they've been rebuilding ever since then. So keep that in mind. Rebuilding can take any amount of time. If you look at like the Memphis Grizzlies made it to the playoffs last year in 2021. They had a very short rebuilding because they had made it in 2017. That's not very long. So they were able to get it together and start a new regime, a new set of players that are really good. So Memphis Grizzlies did it in a very short amount of time, especially if you're a team like Memphis or Sacramento where people don't really want to play. It becomes very difficult. So good on the Memphis Grizzlies. I don't exactly blame the Sacramento Kings because one thing, Tyrese Halliburton brought this up. A lot of players don't want to live in California because state income tax is very high and they have to live in Sacramento. So if they're going to live in the Bay, if they're going to live in LA, they're happy to do it. They're happy to go to California, but you don't want to go to California and then live in Sacramento. It's like the worst of both worlds. So rebuilds are like based on the draft, really. What you're really doing is you're like, okay, I'm not gonna sign any good free agents for a while. I need cheap players. Where do I get my cheap players? Where do I get my cheap good players? I get them in the draft. I get them in the draft, or I trade for cheap new players who are on cheap contracts. So you can get really messed over in the draft. If you're trying to rebuild, you can really screw up your chances of having a good team by drafting poorly. Let's talk about a couple bad draft picks. Not to, crap on these guys. I don't know if I can say on YouTube, I'm not sure. But let's take Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. In 2012, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist was the second pick overall, right behind Anthony Davis for the Charlotte Hornets. Unfortunately, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist had a couple injuries. He didn't play very well. He kind of fizzled out, and now he is 28, and he is a free agent, not playing basketball anywhere, and he hasn't been in the league in like 2 years. Pretty unfortunate. Let's take another example. Dragan Bender. He was drafted by the Suns, and now he's 24, and he's playing in Spain. I don't know. I don't really know who's to blame for that, but the Suns ended up doing well anyway by signing Chris Paul to a very long contract that was for a lot of money. That was a big risk because people thought Chris Paul was washed. And then obviously Devin Booker turned out pretty good. So, they saved it in that way, but the Dragan Bender pick kind of screwed them over a little bit. Anthony Bennett, as we all know, luckily Anthony Bennett, he was the #1 pick. He definitely fizzled out. Now he's playing in Taiwan, Anthony Bennett is. I don't want to just be the guy making fun of Anthony Bennett. I'm sure he's a good dude. I know he's got a lot of friends in the NBA, and he's still playing basketball, and I think that's cool, but he did kind of mess over the Cleveland Cavs. But fortunately, they did get another #1 pick, and they got Kyrie Irving, and they also got #1 pick Andrew Wiggins, traded him to Timberwolves to get Kevin Love. So that team turned out fine because LeBron wanted to come back. So it wasn't a big deal. The rebuild wasn't very long. I don't even know if you could necessarily say it was a rebuild. They basically just came back with LeBron James and Kevin Love and were title contenders. The other guy I want to talk about is Marvin Bagley. Marvin Bagley too, he was the pick for the Sacramento Kings, kind of a botched pick because Trae Young was so good, DeAndre Ayton was pretty good, and of course Luka Doncic, potential top 10 greatest player of all time, and he was the second pick. Bagley was picked above Trae Young and Luka Doncic. It doesn't look good for him. It doesn't look good for the Kings either, but he's traded away to the Detroit Pistons and another team that's had a couple bad draft picks lately. We will see if Marvin Bagley tears it up in Detroit, and let's see if it's the Sacramento Kings system, because the thing I want to bring up is Everyone looks at teams and says, oh, you missed on this player. You missed on that player. Oh, you could have had this player. Maybe it wasn't the player. Maybe it was you. People don't really bring that up. It's like they'll blame the organization for picking the wrong guy when in reality, maybe you picked the right guy, but you didn't develop him. They put the onus on the team, which is good because I think it is on the team, but I don't think it's on the pick. I think it's on the development of the player. Let's take Kawhi Leonard, a 15th pick. Kills it. He had the Spurs development and he did really well. No one would have thought Kawhi Leonard was going to be great. 13th pick, Giannis. The 41st pick, Nikola Jokic. I think it's the development. I think it's the development of the players. I think it's the coaching. I think it's the attention to the game of that player. That's the most important thing. But people want to say, oh, you passed on this guy. Oh, you didn't get this guy. Oh, you didn't get Luka Doncic. You got Marvin Bagley. Well, at the time, that was just the way it was. That was the way that everyone kind of saw it when you looked at mock drafts. So why look at them and say you should have made a different decision? That was the best decision you had with the knowledge you had at that point in time. Develop your players better. That's really what it is. These people aren't making mistakes picking players. They're making mistakes not developing those picks. That's the problem. So I feel bad for a lot of these players who everyone looks at as busts, but maybe they just didn't get the attention that they needed, you know? I mean, I look at Andrew Wiggins, who was a good player, but he was always a disappointment for being a #1 pick, and he always got a lot of being in Minnesota, but then he went to Golden State. He played with Steph, he played with Draymond, he fit in well, they accepted him. He had Steve Kerr as a coach. I'm sure he had a lot of really great development coaches like Kenny Atkinson, who I love. And now, you know, he was an all-star, and now he's an NBA champion. So I think organizations need to focus on development. I think the Heat do a really good job focusing on development. You got guys like Tyler Hero, who I believe was in the teens, and Kendrick Nunn, really wanting to make guys good, wanting to develop them, want them to be good NBA players for their career. And I think that's really admirable, not even from a basketball standpoint, but of a character standpoint, to say, hey, we want guys that are going to be affiliated with our organization to have successful careers, regardless of where they go or where we trade them to. All right, let's talk about a team that is going to be in a rebuilding phase. We're talking about the Pacers, and the Pacers have traded away a couple of their best players because they want to start over. They want to start over from scratch. So here's a couple ideas I have for their actual rebuilding phase. I think it's going to take 2 or 3 years. They're going to be out of the playoffs for 2 or 3 years. I got a feeling they're even going to try to tank this year. So here's a couple things I think they're going to do. They have Tyrese Halliburton. They're going to build their team around Tyrese Halliburton. He has 1 year, and then he has a qualifying offer, restricted free agent sort of situation that I'm sure the Pacers are going to handle, and they're going to sign him to a very large deal. I think they really like him. I like him. I think they're going to sign him to a really large deal and make him the cornerstone of their franchise. Maybe another guy might be the other cornerstone. I think you need 4 cornerstones in a house. I don't know. I don't remember. Buddy Hield, they're going to re-sign him. So Buddy Hield has 1 more year on his contract, and then it's an expiring contract. I think they're going to re-sign him. I also think they're going to re-sign Miles Turner. He's on an expiring contract. Why do I think they're going to re-sign him? Because I remember the Pacers have a hard time signing free agents. They always have a hard time signing free agents. So cap space for the Pacers doesn't really matter, and they already have some cap space. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, whatever, we're not trading these guys to the Lakers. We're not trading these guys anywhere. We're just going to keep them. We're just going to keep them. We're going to re-sign them. We're going to try to build around these 3 guys and Tyrese Halliburton. And maybe next year they're going to try to tank. So maybe they'll get Victor Wembanyama. They'll get another good player in the draft next year. And then I think they're going to try to sign Andrew Wiggins next year in free agency. That's my theory. I think they're going to overpay him. And if you're Indiana, you have to overpay him. I lived in Indiana for a long time. I don't want to live there. Most people don't want to live there. Indianapolis is a nice town, though. You can find the good in any town. Here's a success story, a successful rebuild. I already mentioned the Memphis Grizzlies. So the Memphis Grizzlies traded away Marc Gasol, and they traded away Mike Conley Jr. These were their cornerstones, if you will. These were their cornerstone guys. In 2019, they said, screw it. We'll give Mike Conley the Jazz. We'll get a couple picks back. We'll give Marc Gasol to the Toronto Raptors, who won a championship in exchange for a couple picks. Some of the picks they got, like, from these guys were like Jonas Valanciunas, who then got sent packing. Also Jay Crowder, who also got sent packing, but they got assets back for that. It was all part of a larger rebuilding move, and they did really well with that, because both of those guys are pretty decent players who have done really well on their respective teams, but they've got assets back. So what have the Grizzlies done to actually make it so that they got back? They got back in the playoffs in 2021. Then they were the 2nd seed in 2022, this past year, and they won a round in the playoffs. Pretty cool. So they've done it. That's a successful rebuild. So what did they do? How did they do it? They didn't sign any big free agents. They never did. They never signed anyone. No one wants to go to Memphis. So how did the Memphis Grizzlies get good without signing any giant free agents? They didn't sign any giant free agents. How did they do it? Well, they did it by acquiring players in the draft, either acquiring picks from teams who had already picked their guys, like a Dylan Brooks. We got D'Anthony Melton, Desmond Bane. These were acquired on draft night, so they developed these guys who are now the really great players on their team. So they were able to develop young talent, which I really like about the Memphis Grizzlies. They didn't didn't acquire any crazy like big name stars. They just said, hey, let's take the guys we have who have potential and make them good, which they did do. And I think because of that, there's a really good camaraderie on that team. There's a good passion. There's a lot of guys who want to play Grizzlies basketball. And one thing you can't teach, one thing you can't get from a player, you can't get from anyone in life, is you can't make them care. So I think the Grizzlies, that whole team cares, and that's really important. Another thing they did is they hired Taylor Jenkins. They fired JB Bickerstaff and brought in Taylor Jenkins, who has now kind of transformed that team and part of the culture on that team. That's the main thing I see when I see that team. It looks like a really great culture. And I think that's the most important aspect of winning, is getting guys who want to play for each other and want to be successful together. That's the most important part of a rebuild. Oh, and I skipped this part, but I think coaching is a big thing too. I think when teams are going through rebuilding phases, a lot of times they just kind of fly through coaches willy-nilly because they're trying to find the right fit for their team. So they'll hire a guy, they'll say, hey, we'll hire this guy and you know, hopefully it works out. But if it doesn't work out within a year, then we'll can them and we'll try to get the right guy for the rebuild. So during those stages where teams are rebuilding, they'll fire a lot of people. Alvin Gentry got fired from the Pelicans. They brought in Stan Van Gundy, fired him within a year, and now they have Willie Green. Willie Green seems to be the right fit for that team. That's another team that's been pretty successful in rebuilding. So they fly through these coaches trying to find the right one. They don't want to stick on one too long. They want to just try to cycle coaches out and see which one's going to be the best one for longevity, you know. So thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. That's what a rebuild is. Those are a couple examples of rebuild. I don't know why I'm recapping. What is this? College? What is this, an essay? But thanks for watching. Be good to your moms.